What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping back in to talk about Outriders in our series of class build videos. And in this one we're going to be taking a look at one of the 4 classes in the game, the Technomancer. And as the name suggests, this class has a few wonderful bits of technology in the backpack, such as an automated cryo turret and a multi-missile launcher. And so we're going to talk more about the class, but before we get going, I must say a big thank you to Square Enix for sponsoring this video and giving me the opportunity to share the Outriders experience with you guys. If you do enjoy the look of the game, then be sure to follow the link in the description box below for more info. We also have a demo version of the game available at the moment, which gives us a sample of the first few hours of the game for free, and is currently available to download ahead of the full launch on April 1st. Outriders will release on PC, Xbox Series X and S, as well as Xbox One, PlayStation 5 and PS4. And all of the progress from the demo is going to carry over to the full game. So it's definitely worth checking out. But now let's talk about the Technomancer. And this class is set up in a few interesting ways. As the gadget class, we are focused on mid to long range. It's also a very capable support class, able to freeze groups or aggressive enemies, throw out missiles to deal damage to multiple targets in front of us, which synergizes really well with some of the other classes' abilities like the Trickster's Anomaly Sphere, which we spoke about in our last video. But also, we've got neat options like proximity mines and toxic rounds, which slowly damage and increase the vulnerability of enemies. Outriders has a lot of customization and a pretty deep RPG loot grind, so let's take a look at how all of this stuff works. In the demo, we can unlock 4 of the core skills on each class, and then we can slot 3 skills at once. So for Technomancer, I currently have Blighted Rounds, and these inflict the toxic effect onto enemies, which is a damage over time, ticking health away on affected targets. It's especially good for tanky enemies and bosses, or any situation where you're continuously DPSing, because it's free damage, right? But also enemies nearby to a target hit by Blighted Rounds will be affected by toxic and receive 50% of the damage of the enemy we hit first, so it certainly has some nice crowd control capacity as well. And then we have the cryo turret, and we can throw this one down as an automated turret, so it targets any enemies in its line of sight. And we can see it deals 5 damage per round, but also has its own health, which ticks away over time whenever you use it. Although it will be there for a few seconds, unless it receives damage from enemies, which it often does. And interestingly, that can actually serve as a distraction, and that can be kind of useful when playing solo, because you can either use it on enemy spawns or throw it down in retreat to help you out with enemies that are rushing. And then there is the pain launcher, which of course sounds rather dangerous, and well, it is. Kind of like the turret, it can be thrown down alongside us, and it fires a barrage of missiles which deal damage on every hit, but also have interrupts, so it'll stop any targets using skills in their tracks, and again, it's really fun to drop it as enemies spawn in front of us, or to use in conjunction with other classes. So when a Trickster freezes a sphere of targets, you can place it quite intentionally in front of that, and absolutely destroy groups of enemies. It does have a range limit, and the projectiles have a trajectory of their own, so it doesn't infinitely track targets across the map or anything, and is best used at the same elevation as targets, or indeed above targets. Otherwise, as I've done many times, you might end up just potatoing your missiles away. But there is a fun little learning curve there, and the skill that I'm not using too much in my current build is a proximity mine. This is also really powerful, dealing 186 damage and interrupting targets. And in the full game we'll eventually unlock access to all 8 main class skills, but we should also mention the intrinsic class skill, which for Technomancer grants freeze on melees and recovers a portion of the damage we deal as health, so damage output is actually significant to survivability on this class. And then we get an increase of 15% to long range weapon damage, as well as skill leech and weapon leech. And I have seen some players ask about leech effects, and basically they refer to ways of earning health back. So for Technomancer, doing damage will heal us, and weapon leech refers to weapon damage healing. Then of course skill leech refers to skill healing us. So when I do damage with my turret, for example, skill leech is the effect that's actually healing us. And we can upgrade the class trees to increase those effects, which we'll talk more about in a moment. But getting a hang of the core gameplay with Technomancer has been pretty fun, especially figuring out the timing and positioning of things like the turret, and how that can be used to lane certain angles, control mobs or rushers, and so on. And of course, the various mods that we can get on armor and weapons are pretty important. So earlier on in the demo, we managed to pick up some epic footwear, and this is the purple variant of gear. Most of the gear in the demo is rare, but as we can see here, when the quality of the gear increases, we get higher stats and attributes, and these boots have a mod called Rain of Pain, and it increases the cooldown of the pain launcher missile by 34%, as well as increasing magazine size by 10% across the board. So we're simply able to use the missiles more often, which is always good. And of course abilities are a really big thing in Outriders, so the more the merrier. And then we have another mod on our headgear for the pain launcher, and this causes a small explosion in a 5-meter radius when activated. Also very useful because this is a medium range ability, and there are plenty of instances where you'll throw it down while surrounded by enemies. So with those two mods there, our launcher is receiving two pretty good benefits. But for the cryo turret, we do have a glove mod, which makes the turret explode in a 6-meter radius before being destroyed. And as we spoke about before, since enemies often attack the turret, it's pretty neat to gain a benefit there. And for aggressive breacher and pitbull enemies who like to get close, it becomes a pretty lethal distraction, in addition to its ability to freeze enemies in its line of sight. One of the things I really enjoy about Outriders are these perks with distinct kind of tangible benefits. And for our blighted rounds, we do have two mods active, so our upper armor has no pain, no gain, where the skill ending actually triggers 40% of the damage dealt into healing and spreads it evenly amongst allies, so that's really strong. And our lower armor also has spare mag, where blighted rounds remain effective for an additional magazine before cooling down, so we can essentially get 2 full magazines of ammo before the skill resets. And this can be slightly counterintuitive to our first blighted rounds mod because it means that ally healing is less regular, and that's because of course we're not ending that skill as often, but it does seem to stack, so any healing our allies do receive is more significant because we can record more damage during the time that the skill is active. Regardless, with how regularly we can use the rounds, it ends up being a great team health benefit that we can also provide. And I think once again, this kind of gameplay is one of the main things that makes Outriders really fun. And you know what else is fun, especially with blighted rounds, but in this build we are using a currently very rare legendary weapon called Torment and Agony. It's actually a pair of pistols, so dual wielding is a thing in this game. And this is a very powerful close range weapon. Shots actually mark enemies, and when reloading, it deals 5 times the weapon's damage to every marked enemy. And then it has clip combustion, and reloading creates a shockwave that deals 25 damage to enemies within a 5-meter radius. And so you don't actually need to fire all of your rounds into an enemy to get a kill. Reloading will do some damage, and that allows us to work the health of multiple targets down, and then reload to finish them, which is pretty interesting. Also, if you're being rushed and have to reload, those targets immediately around you are going to be hit with some damage. So with us having to push a little bit closer to enemies when using Pain Launcher, this is a pretty awesome weapon to have ready, and absolutely shreds with toxic rounds active as well. And then we're using a rare assault rifle as a mid-range, and killing shots replenish 62 points of health to allies in a 5-meter radius of the target. Another pretty solid support bonus there. And the third weapon, which is another epic, is the Red Widow Sniper. And this is classified as an automatic sniper, but actually comes with burst fire, so it deals some really nasty damage, especially at long range, thanks to our intrinsic Technomancer traits. And then shots from the weapon create a fusion blast, which also deals damage to nearby targets, with killing shots spawning explosives around a target that deal an additional 153 damage per explosive in a 5-meter range. So it does absolutely destroy. It's a really useful weapon for taking out enemy snipers with one burst, in addition to being able to pump out some damage into bosses, so it's pretty awesome. I think some of the semi-automatic snipers can deal a bit more damage, but being a burst weapon and having a ranged scope probably makes the weapon slightly more forgiving. Either way, Technomancer is feeling like a bunch of fun to play. Again, for me personally, I'd say the best part of the Outriders gameplay loop is that sense of agency that we can build over encounters by speccing up, and focusing on how that can work while playing both solo and in a team. You can see in this gameplay just how much we're able to shred enemies as a team of 3. And another fun thing about the game is how gear starts to matter more or less straight away. In terms of rewards, the endgame kind of starts immediately, and even gear which ultimately becomes redundant does have attributes which feed into the crafting portion of the game. And that's worth touching on for a moment because later on in the game we are going to get the ability to swap the equipped mods on our gear via the crafting menu. So to unlock mods, we'll need to dismantle pieces of gear that have them equipped. There are 3 tiers of mods found across different loot rarities, and by spending the iron currency currently dropping in the game, we can swap and change the mods that pieces of gear have, but also crafting is going to let us increase the quality of gear items, so we'll have ways to upgrade rares to epics, and that'll increase the attributes and number of bonuses on those pieces of gear. And then there are even archetype changes which can be made to weapons via crafting, so there are going to be some cool systems there, and there is a separate video from the devs with more info about that kind of end game element, as well as expeditions after the main story, which will be the kind of ultimate gameplay loop for us to acquire the best rewards and build characters for significantly more challenging content. I'm definitely very interested to see that stuff. But in terms of the Technomancer, let's finally touch on a couple of the skill tree items. So as we spoke about in the last build video, the skill trees are very significant, and by the time we finish the main story quest, we'll be able to get access to 30 class points that can be spent to select certain bonuses. And some of the large nodes this time focus on things like snipers, so Sniper Master grants 40% weapon damage to sniper rifles across the board, and increases the drop chance by 12%. And it's really neat how skills that affect the gameplay sandbox can also contribute to how rewards work. The tree also has perks like Cannonade, And activating the Ordnance skill increases all fireteam member weapon damage by 30% for 10 seconds. The Tech Shaman tree has Exposing Toxin, where afflicting enemies with Toxin will also inflict the vulnerable status effect on targets, and so that increases the damage they'll take. And we can increase our anomaly power, which also affects allies by activating Decay, which are some of the upcoming skills for the class. And then nodes like Emergency Transfusion, which will double our skill leech when health goes below 30%. And that gives us a pretty broad idea of some of the stuff we'll be able to do in that skill tree when they become fully available later on. But for now, guys, that's a bit of a better look at the Technomancer in Outriders. It's been a bunch of fun to play on, but remember, we get 6 character slots in the demo, so it's easy to experiment with them all and get some characters started before the full launch, since progress will carry over. Also be sure to follow the link in the description for more info on the full game, and thanks again to Square Enix for sponsoring the video. Let us know your experiences with Outriders in the comment section, and as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in, but for now, whatever you get up to, I hope you have an awesome day.